My research question is at the edge between history and philosophy, in the frame of what is called historical epistemology. The fundamental question is always the same, and it is how knowledge is generated. In the frame of historical epistemology, however, this question is transformed and declined in a series of sub-questions: how knowledge evolves, how knowledge is transmitted, how knowledge is transformed. I am personally interested in particular on processes of homogenization of knowledge, when knowledge becomes more and more homogeneous over time and in a specific region, a specific space for a specific society. I am a historian of science and therefore I'm interested in scientific knowledge, processes of homogenization of scientific knowledge. As a historian, I investigate historical sources, historical material, and I don't look only at their content, or their scientific content, in order to see whether these sources are becoming more and more homogeneous over time, but also look at their context, the context in which they were generated, or used, or distributed, or destroyed, or forgotten. And from a philosophical point of view, I look at the very mechanisms, the very argumentative structures that bring knowledge to become more and more homogeneous over time. Scientific knowledge is an important identity-shaping factor for a society. While investigating processes of homogenization of knowledge, I'm also investigating processes of emergence and generation of cultural and societal identity. Imagine a student who now would like to study mathematics and enroll at the university. He or she could enroll in New York, Beijing, or Berlin, everywhere, and this student would probably study the same content, at least for the first years. This is the result of a process of homogenization of scientific knowledge. And I am interested in the historical roots of this process. When did it start? Do we have examples in the past? And I look, therefore, at the students in the past, and specifically, I look at European students between the 12th and the 17th century, and at the content of the mathematical sciences that they were learning at the universities there. Therefore, we analyze a great amount of historical sources, and these historical sources are university textbooks. The project is a project that develops in the frame of a new emerging discipline, which is called computational history, and brings together experts in computer sciences, in statistics, in physics of the complex systems, machine learning, with historians. We extract data from the historical sources, representative for the content of those university textbooks, for instance, from the text, from the visual elements, from the numerical apparatus of those texts, in order to be able to assess when and how that content is becoming homogeneous. And then we look at the social context, as I said. So we are interested in the historical actors of the time, the scholars who wrote those textbooks, or the printers, the publishers, or those who distributed those textbooks, and finally, as far as it is possible, the students. We look also at them. We extract many data, and we create data sets that are highly dimensional. They are complex objects. And then on the basis of our research questions, we create mathematical objects in order to analyze this data. These mathematical objects are networks, usually, quite complex, multi-layer, interconnected networks that then we analyze on a purely mathematical level. Once we achieve a result, a meaningful result, then we go back to our historical sources and we empirically validate our results. In this way, we are also creating workflows and so-called ground truth in order to further develop machine-learned-based algorithms that help us back in extracting data faster and scaling up the project in this way, and also in analyzing this data. In this respect, so this project, my research question, develops on 3 different levels, not only the historical and the philosophical, but also the level related to computer sciences. We achieved a series of important results and important findings on all 3 levels. From a historical point of view, we have found out that while Europe was splitting apart because of the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, we see the formation of a first uniform society all over Europe. Was members, the students and the scholars, more and more shared the same scientific knowledge. So the knowledge is becoming homogeneous. The most important aspect of this finding is the fact that the reason for the splitting apart of Europe is also the reason for the formation of this first international scientific society ante litteram. The mechanisms behind the process of homogenization of knowledge is mechanisms of imitation. Imitation of textbooks produced in Wittenberg. So the same Wittenberg was the reason for splitting and for uniforming the society. In this case, the scientific society. From a philosophical point of view, we found out that this imitation becomes particularly high and particularly intensive when the dynamic of innovation, the rate of innovation, also becomes particularly intensive. We have found a statistical correlation, is not yet a causal explanation. When you insert innovations, you bring something new into the textbooks, you would expect a diversification, an increase of heterogeneity of the textbooks. But eventually this is not the case. The highest the rate of innovation, the highest is the rate of imitation. While changing single individual textbooks, you are actually producing homogeneous textbooks all over the continent. This is the kind of finding that we have on the philosophical point of view. From a methodological point of view, we have now finished coding and the test phase of important algorithms, machine learning-based algorithms to extract and analyze data, and we are releasing all this code, or sometimes even in form of web services in this year, 2022, so that the community of historians, also for those historians who are not able to access a high-level knowledge in computer sciences, can make use of them and create their own data sets. Speaking about the relevance of my findings, I would keep the three levels, historical, philosophical, and methodological, distinguished. The historical finding can spread a certain optimism nowadays, where the subject of stability and integrity of the European nations in the EU is so important. The optimism is based on the fact that we are able to show that Europe as a continent is sharing already such an identity since 5th century. We can count on a very long-term identity that keeps us together. From a philosophical point of view, the logic behind our relations between innovation and homogenization is the same as the logic behind information input in the social media and opinion generation or opinion influence. From a methodological point of view, we are now ready to move to the next step from machine learning-based tools into more sophisticated applications of artificial intelligence, and eventually to formalize our historical arguments. And as it is well known, historical arguments are among the most complex kinds of arguments that human beings are capable of from a logic point of view. And if we are able to move into this direction, then this means that we are able to give an enormous contribution to the development of artificial intelligence as well. The outlook of my research from a historical point of view is the development of a very, very new field, another new field that is emphatically called predicting history. Predicting history means developing approaches, in this case very much related to the use of artificial intelligence, that help us almost as a partner finding out which are the relevant historical sources to understand our past. We cannot forget that it is estimated that alone in Europe only 10% of the historical sources have been investigated and analyzed by historians until now. I think that this kind of research, the research that I am accomplishing, will mostly contribute to the abolishment of an important barrier that is within our society since the 19th century. And this barrier is the barrier between the humanities and the natural or exact sciences on the other side. That society is able to understand and therefore also take control of what science is doing and in which direction science is developing, at the same time that scientists acquire a specific sensitivity that can be developed only if they are exposed to humanities studies. A good example for this is the debate concerning ethics and the use of AI.